Welcome, Brendan, in the Collaborative Research Center Origin and Function of Metaorganisms. It's a great pleasure, it's an honor to have you here. We are focused mostly on different animal and plant model systems to understand host-microbe interaction. You come from a very different background, and you are a worldwide authority on microbial ecology. What a fit, and we are very much looking forward to your lecture later on. What got you interested in microbial ecology? How did all started? I mean, in your early days, can you tell us?
Oh, I'd be happy to, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's what you have here in the Metaorganism Center is quite special, as I've told you before. So it's a pleasure to be here and have a chance to talk with you and contribute to the center. So my interest in microbial ecology kind of go way back into my childhood. So I grew up on a farm in a rural area, and so I was always very interested in the natural world. And as many children did, I think in my generation, I spent a lot of time laying on my stomach, staring at ants and watching nature in small scale move around. And so the idea that nature unfolds on all these different scales, from the visible to the invisible, is something that's always interested me. So when I had a chance to study microbial ecology, it was a kind of natural fit for me. But it was not a linear path, though. I had lots of sort of deviations on the way to becoming a microbial ecologist.
Yeah. So who brought your attention to the microbes, which were at the time not the very obvious thing?
Yeah. So for me, it was really two work experiences. So I started my undergraduate training, and then I left it for a period of time. I started a family, I worked a number of jobs, and one of the jobs that I had was to run California's organic farming program, so to be the chief inspector for the state of California. And the farmers I worked with back in the 1980s told many of them, the best among them, would tell me that they did not grow plants, they grew microbes, and the microbes grew their plants. And this was really intriguing for me, to what they meant by this. And so this idea that the invisible world has such impact on things like plants and animals was really of interest to me. And later on, I took a job as a cheesemaker, which is in a way kind of applied microbial ecology. So I had to create a world to make these microbes happy, so they would do the work that I wanted them to do, which was to make cheese.
Wow, okay, yeah. So I keep two things in my mind, coming back later to that, returning to them. One is obviously no career ever is linear, and to my mind, often it should have a broad fundament of different things what you are doing, and then you may focus on something. And the other thing, the cheese, we will come back to the cheese at the end when we talk about
my favorite topics.
Is it what can we make use out of our research? Let's make a big jump, and you are famous, and I'm not sure if you coined, but you are identified with a new term, which is quite a mind-blowing thing, and you reminded us that we have to think beyond organisms and individuals to communities, and so articles and lectures and talks you're giving are now entitled on Metacommunities. Can you tell us a little bit what you think about that? What is a meta-community in your term?
Oh, happy to. So a meta-community is a number of small local communities, so local assemblages of species that are linked by dispersal. So the canonical model of a meta-community would be a community of organisms living on islands, where each island has its own community, but they're in communication with each other through the immigration and emigration among the islands.
Do we talk about microbial species or in general?
In general. So this is a term that comes originally from the study of plants and animals in a landscape, like islands, for example, or ponds, where there's this distinction between the habitat that the species live in and sort of intervening areas where they can't live. And this is an idea that we've started to apply to the microbial communities that live inside animals and live on the surfaces of plants, since each animal and each plant represents kind of an island of habitat for those microbes.
So our understanding of living organisms is getting another level more complex. The use of the sequencing technologies has shown us that organisms are usually multi-organismic, with billions of invisible small microbes, in addition to the visible tissue. But now what you are saying is that even in the organisms or individuals within a given population may be linked by sharing microbes or by transferring microbes. I assume that must have, and we think a lot about this provocative thesis, a lot of application and consequences also in medical terms.
Absolutely. So people who've studied microorganisms from the point of view of disease, so pathogenic microbiology, they've known this for a long time, since the very early days of microbiology, that disease-causing organisms can move around among hosts, and that's how we get the spread of infectious disease. But this idea that beneficial microbes also move around is relatively new for reasons I don't fully understand, but it's taken us a while as microbiologists to realize how important that can be. And that opens up a whole raft of interesting possibilities. So, for example, health could be as transmissible as disease. I think that's an interesting idea worth pursuing.
Yeah. Also in terms of evolutionary aspects, so how did certain behavior evolve? If that's the case that the microbiome is transferable, then probably maybe some behavior evolved because it is used to transfer the microbes.
That's right. Yeah. It's a possibility.
Yeah. Many of the diseases we are interested in here in Kiel in the center are so chronic inflammatory diseases, in particular inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, and the WHO called them for a long time non-communicable diseases, indicating that patient A suffering of that chronic disease cannot infect individual B sitting next to each other because this is a systemic chronic disease. That was for a long time the thinking. So the question now is how communicable are non-communicable diseases?
So our view of communicable diseases is in terms of time, is very narrow. I mean, we have as our models these really infectious and very acute diseases where exposure to someone with the disease increases in some large way your propensity for getting that disease. But it may be that something like inflammatory bowel disease is communicable, is infectious, but at a different point in the history of the person. So, for example, maybe they acquired these microorganisms early in life, or early in life their natural microbial community was disturbed in a way that then resulted in them developing these inflammatory diseases later in life. So I think it's important for us to broaden the window of time over which we think about the movement of microbes and their effects on disease.
Yeah. Yeah, it also, I think it brings a completely new picture, in terms of medical, in medical terms, in the population, in the importance of being member of a given population, which can be a good thing or a bad thing.
That's right.
A population is also a fitness-relevant entity, and and also if you think in evolution, I mean, if the population and the transfer of the microbes between individuals of the population is a fitness-relevant trait, then behavior may have evolved, social behavior may have evolved to encourage or to allow this transfer in a maybe more efficient way.
That's right. Social behavior might have a component of its evolution that would be due to the transfer of microbes. So would other sorts of behaviors. For example, nesting behaviors in animals could very well be driven in part by the desire to kind of shape the exposure that young animals have to their microbiota. So it opens up a whole new kind of array of possibilities.
Yeah, so it's fascinating if you think, you have now accepted the new level of complexity, then all of a sudden another colleague comes and opens another level of complexity. Brings me, let's talk a little bit about how do you get to your observations and maybe to the role of model systems. You have microbial model systems where you study certain aspects, but in your institution there's also animal models. how you see that, how important, and what is a good model, and are models necessary, or is theory can do it all?
That's a great question. So I think models are very necessary as a bridge between the complexity of nature and the clarity of models and theory. We need something in the middle where we can do manipulative experiments, where we can work in that middle ground between the too complex and the too simple. And an ideal model system would have a long history of use and tools that would allow its manipulation. And in terms of working with microbes, it would be ideal model system. You'd be able to render that model organism germ-free and then reconstitute its microbiome. Those are the sorts of things that would be ideal. But I think this interplay between theory and experimental models and studies in nature is really important. And centers like this center and a center like the one we have in Oregon, I feel like are most powerful because they allow that movement back and forth between theory, experiment, and observation.
And if we talk about model, probably we should include modeling.
That's right.
Being mathematical modeling or metabolic modeling. So I think if I talk to young people, the approaches to take until one gets to a kind of a meaningful answer are probably manifold. And so we, at least here, we rely, and in a very fruitful way, we rely a lot on mathematical modeling in a kind of variety, because it allows you to see a complex feature of a population or behavior of two in a very distant way, and then you can look at it and can ask, do I find that in reality? Can I model that in reality? Or something is missing in reality, then the model has to be readapted. And so, yeah.
I totally agree. And I tell my students that I think of mathematical modeling as exploring the possible, and working with experimental models as exploring the plausible, and working in nature is actually about exploring what is. What exists in nature. And we need all of those approaches.
That's a challenge for the junior generation. And the challenge is that we have left far behind. I grew up in a very reductionistic environment and was told to look deep into tissue and stem cell and molecular signature of the stem cell, but and so we have programs around in the world which talk about, the CIFAR has such a program, molecular architecture of life. Fascinating. Obviously we have understood life, but on the other side, so many new problems, new diseases, more diseases than ever. Also, we have understood the molecular architecture of life. How can that work? And my explanation is, we lost probably seeing the whole organism, or the complexity, or the meta-organism, or even the meta-community. How to train junior people to not giving up the reductionistic approach, but not to forget what I call a holistic view.
So I think training students together, students who have interests in and spend their time focused on different levels of complexity, I think that's important, where from their peers, they learn about other scales of knowing and other scales of making inferences. And I think reassuring students that they don't have to learn everything at once. Sometimes these sorts of appreciations of complexity are overwhelming. Right? Students think they need to work at every scale all the time. And this idea that they have a lifetime as scientists ahead of them to, broaden their perspective or even narrow their perspective into different scales. I think I feel like I need to reassure my students that all the time. They're in a hurry, which is good. They're excited, and they also feel compelled to answer these big questions. But it takes time to get to wrap your head around all of this complexity.
And some of them are very focused. And as you say, think, the whole complexity, biology, biomedicine is already unfolded around them, not realizing that most of the stuff is not yet even visible, but you must be prepared to dig into there. And so I think, is there any advice you would give to the juniors when a young master student or a junior PhD student comes, how to train him or herself for being equipped for the challenges in the future in our field?
I feel like the field is moving so quickly that students have to be nimble. And I feel like the biggest obstacle to nimbleness is fear. That I try to reassure my students to be fearless about asking questions. Question themselves, question each other, and that's difficult for all humans. I think our egos get in the way, but having the questions being paramount is really important, and that means developing a kind of fearlessness. And then you can be nimble. You can move as the field moves and take advantage of new discoveries and new tools. And that takes practice.
Sure. Yeah. It also, I guess, needs a certain personality which is open, particularly when we think, as you do now, engaging the social sciences in our questions and answers. You must be ready to find the language and also ready to listen to this person, and that's not always easy. Yeah.
Oh, it's true, and I think that starts with the position of valuing different ways of knowing. So realizing that a social scientist or a philosopher, or a medical doctor has different perspectives, all perfectly valid ways to look at the world.
Yeah. If a junior person asks you, where will the field be in 10 years, what would you say? What do we know and what do we still not know?
That's a great question. I feel like we're in the middle of this big transition, especially within microbial ecology, and that includes both microbial ecology of animals and plants and of environments outside of animals and plants. And this transition period we're in is moving from a field that was limited by technology and the ability to gather data to a field that's limited by ideas and the ability to synthesize and make sense of data. And so that's where the field is going. And so to me, the future is about making sense of large amounts of very rich data. And that requires understanding how data is generated, but also it means building a toolbox of skills that allows one to really work with big, rich data sets.
Yeah. What is still a major open question in the field, in your opinion?
Oh, there's so many. My favorites are that I find it remarkable that we still don't know how humans or really any other animal obtains their microbiome. So we all have associated with us this incredible collection of microbes that's so essential to our health. We don't know where they come from. There's assumptions that we get them from our mother or from our parents, but attempts to document that have proven to be really difficult. Alternatively, we get them from our environment or from our diet, but that has also proven to be difficult to document. And so, to me, that's a big question that is important for us to establish if we want to be able to manipulate microbiomes, to improve health.
Mm-hmm. Do we know where they all live in a human? In terms of, for me, another open question is the spatial organization.
Yeah.
Where are they really?
Uh-huh.
And we may have some clues, maybe on the skin, but in the gut, very difficult.
It's true, absolutely. Yeah, and we have this very black box approach to
7 meters of intestine, and we sequence what comes out of that.
That's right.
But yeah, that's all. And we don't know much. So I think understanding the spatial organization and the rules. It's so much organized. I think it's another major thing.
Absolutely. I tell my students it's as if we were ecologists studying a river, and all we do is sample where at the mouth of the river where it runs into the ocean, and we try to infer everything upstream.
That's a good thing. So, that's a good thing. Coming a little bit to how do humans, so microbes affect humans in many ways, in good ways and in bad ways. Do humans affect the microbial community?
Oh, of course, yeah. Every moment of every day on large scales and small scales. It's hard to imagine a situation in which we don't affect the microbial world. So, much of my research has been focused on how humans interact with the microbial world, and we interact with it on very small scales in our own bodies, through the actions of our immune system. We interact with the microbial world through medicine, right? Through the use of antibiotics, for example, through disinfection of our local environments, through the way we build buildings. So the microbes in this room are different than those in a room that was ventilated differently or had different windows. And then on the larger scales, we're continually shaping the microbial world through how we manage environments. So when we turn a forest into a farm, or build a building where there was not one before, we are altering the microbial world in those places. Now, at this point, we don't know if those alterations are net negative or net positive or neutral, because we know so little about the microbial world.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, our friend and colleague Martin Blaser calls or has written this famous book, Missing Microbes. So his message is very clear that actually when we influence and affect the microbes, it's mostly on the cost of the diversity of the microbial communities, at least in our body. Maybe also in a microbial ecological context. Would you share that view?
I do think it's true. I mean, we don't have as much evidence for that as we do for plants and animals, but those studies that have been done have shown that usually diversity is altered. Either the number of species in a particular place, so for example, the number of species of microbes in our bodies is altered through Western medicine in particular and Western diets, but also the similarity in communities from place to place. So for years I studied what happens in the Amazon rainforest when we change that forest into a farm. And what happens is we homogenize the species across space and in that way lose species. So I can remember giving a talk nearly 20 years ago at the American Museum of Natural History where I brought up the idea of a conservation of microorganisms. And the audience laughed. They thought I was making a joke. But now it's become, much more commonplace to talk about the need for conservation.
Oh yeah,
potentially.
there's Gloria Dominguez-Bello's Microbiome Vault initiative, which does exactly that. And so we accept that humans, and we all influenced by our way of living, by urbanization, whatever, that we change, that we impact the microbiome. What I know or learn from ecologists is that diversity usually is a good thing to have. So that means losing diversity is per se always kind of dangerous, and we should avoid losing diversity. Is that what the ecologists would say?
I think most would say that. I mean, we don't know that for certain. The world is complex, and there's examples where the loss of diversity hasn't resulted in negative impacts. But on average, that seems to be true. And I believe, as many ecologists do, that it's important to use the precautionary principle. Right? And so until we understand that a loss of diversity isn't going to result in a very negative impact, we should be cautious about reducing diversity in a large way and on a global scale. Yeah. And there's this perception that microbes are so diverse that shouldn't matter, but that's not true.
Yeah. I mean, being cautious, of course, that's the word of the day and probably also of the decade. There is so much hype in our field now, and wherever you are and you say you work on host-microbe interactions, some very good colleagues already get a little turned off because. But what we have to do, and I think our center really does it, we have to focus on mechanistic understanding and on causal relationships. If we do that, we get a deep understanding of what's going on. And another part of the hype is that people think the microbes can do everything, and microbes can fix any disease, and microbes can fix any problem. What do you think about the applicability of the knowledge we have? I mean, probiotics are there since Metchikov's times, but would you see that in 5 or 10 years, when we have understood maybe the microbial ecology in or on a human body, is there a way of using that knowledge then in terms of making people, I would even say, happier or at least healthier?
I would hope so. At this point, the market is so far ahead of the science that sometimes I get a little frightened. There are a lot of claims being made about what the microbiome can do, the hype, exactly. Yeah. And there's companies that are marketing products that have not been tested, have not demonstrated to be useful. But I would like to think that we'll have made progress in 10 years where this is possible. And I think for certain disorders, for diabetes, for example, I think that has great potential for a microbially mediated approach to relieving the symptoms of diabetes. I think that's one example, and perhaps for inflammatory bowel disease would be another. I think in some targeted cases like that, we'll be able to demonstrate that an understanding of microbial ecology can make a difference. And we're seeing that already with something like Clostridium difficile infection, where there are microbiome-related interventions that seem to be useful. So I think if our peers outside of science can be patient with us and let us build up the scientific basis that we need to make these solid contributions to medicine, they'll be there. And then they should, at this point, disbelieve any of the hype that they hear.
Yeah, working actively against the hype and say, look, this is now real causal or mechanistic understanding of what's going on. Yeah. If I look back, I think it's a great pleasure to have now here one of the leaders of microbial ecology. By myself, I'm an evolutionary developmental biologist, I'm a zoologist, I'm working closely here with medical people, with mathematicians. Isn't it amazing and also a wonderful sign that, and also a challenge, of course, in training and doing research, that all these sciences are getting together and focusing now on a major question, and that is obviously life as we were used to see it is much more complicated than we ever thought, and it needs the joint effort of the different disciplines to come together.
I do think it's very exciting. I mean, I'm someone who's always been attracted to interdisciplinary science, and now I find that I have a lot of colleagues around me who are seeing the value of that now, and part of it is because questions about the microbiome, about the microbes associated with animals and plants are so complex. They really need us to bring to bear, all these different disciplines at once. So evolution, ecology, biochemistry, physiology, microbiology, et cetera, and then beyond to anthropology and philosophy, as we've talked about. I mean, we really need all of these to make sense of this complex association that our bodies really, constitute.
Thank you very much, Brendan, for coming, and we are very much looking forward to your lecture.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Thomas.